Changing the topic to the United States, you had mentioned in your list of political risks for 2009, if I remember correctly, number one was the U.S. Congress. But I know that you commented recently that one of the issues facing President Obama is the fact that there's fear and anger within the American public. And I presume that this is filtering into what we're seeing in Congress now, fear and anger. The question is, how is President Obama doing in sort of managing in an atmosphere of fear and anger regarding the economic situation and the stimulus package? Is he striking the right note, or is he missing the point that there's fear and anger in the American
I personally like the note he's striking from an emotive sense. He's not giving into, sort of the potential to be a serious populist, which would be a dangerous thing economically. You create tit-for-tat protectionism with other countries around the world, and that's an economic spiral that we can't afford. But he is having a hard time, I think, connecting with the sentiment of the American public and the media and Congress as a consequence. I mean, Obama is clearly by nature thoughtful, rational, a little cool, and a gradualist. And this is an environment where being a gradualist is pretty tough. And I think that we've seen that with I'm going to talk about a big stimulus, but now let's talk about fiscal responsibility. No matter how smart it is to talk about fiscal responsibility, it seems like a joke in the context of $800 billion additional stimulus, AIG with its hand out, the automotives with their hands out, talk about nationalizing Citigroup, Citibank now, and Bank of America, to talk the next day about fiscal responsibility. It doesn't resonate. It seems tone deaf. And I think part of the problem Obama is going to have is being able to continue to carry the people. And Congress will spiral out very quickly if he looks like he's not doing that. Now, his numbers have gone down. What's interesting is so far his numbers have gone down really with the Republicans. He's on balance to the extent that he can't carry everyone. He's saying, okay, I'll just give up on the Republicans and work with the Democrats. Not a surprise. It's easier for him to do, but it will cause problems for him longer term. Problems because the Democrats are more likely in Congress to push some of this more protectionist policy in place, which he won't be able to derail. And secondly, because if the Republicans aren't on board with broader stimulus packages, then they are going to be pointing the finger much more quickly when things continue to go wrong, as they certainly will, given the depth of the economic problems in the United States, irrespective of how good the stimulus packages may be.
Right. Just sort of drilling into one of the details or one of the specifics about the stimulus package, I'd be interested in your view on the Buy American provisions. And how is he handling that in light of this overall problem of managing the American public, bringing it along, and trying to weigh these different interests?
Well, the desire on the part, I think there was a concern in the early days when Obama was running for president that he was a protectionist himself. If you looked at many of his early economic advisors, a lot of folks from Chicago, professors that weren't as well known in Washington, they said this guy might be too much of a progressive, and he's going to be very pro-labor, and he's going to sort of support a lot of this sort of pro-U.S. anti-globalization economic measures, and that in this form of an economic climate will have negative consequences, no question. Clearly, when Congress tried to put this Buy American piece into the stimulus package, the Obama reaction was directly negative. But they weren't able to get rid of it. They compromised, and they watered it down, and they said it's going to be consistent with making sure that it's consistent with existing free trade obligations that the U.S. has internationally. There will be enough, sort of a fine print around this piece of legislation to drive a truck through. But the reality is that other countries will use this rhetorically to justify their own stimulus.
Right. I was going to ask you, that was going to be my next question, is how are we doing in terms of setting an example for the rest of the world? You had mentioned previously that the rest of the world was sort of waiting in a way to see what the United States would do. How are we doing now, generally speaking? And I don't mean just today, but just generally.
This is a very important question because is leadership in this environment a question of setting a good example? Is that enough? Because, Wen Jiabao, Chinese premier, has been saying that the best thing the Chinese government can do for the world is keep its own house in order. It wasn't create leadership for other folks. It wasn't bail out other countries. It isn't be part of the G20. It isn't help create new infrastructure. It isn't buy U.S. treasuries. It's not buy U.S. treasuries. It's keep its own house in order. Is the best thing the United States can do to keep its own house in order? I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure that's sufficient, because the U.S. is increasingly has a model, an economic model that is being challenged by other countries. And the fact is that there's a great danger. I know this is a hopelessly trite phrase, but throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The United States has supported a free market system, and over the course of the last 10, 20 years, that free market system spiraled out of control. But the notion that fetishized hypercapitalism in the United States doesn't work does not mean that we should come to the conclusion that the Chinese system of no transparency and no rule of law and state control is somehow a better system.
Right.
It's not. And the United States just getting its act together by itself isn't going to cut it. We actually have to be more than that in terms of global leadership. And if the one thing I've seen so far in these early days of the Obama administration is, boy, is he fortunate that there has not been any geopolitical issue to distract him. They sent nobody to Davos of any merit. They're not engaging seriously on the international front. They're not dealing in a serious way with the big international sort of crises down the road. They're largely pushing them off. They're focusing domestically. They better do that real fast, because there are going to be global responsibilities that are going to hit these guys.